Imagine waking up to breaking news that the world's most powerful military has launched a massive air assault in the Middle East. Night skies light up with missiles. Television screens show green-tinted footage of explosions, and the name of one country suddenly dominates global headlines. For many people, this was their first real exposure to modern warfare, broadcast live to the world. But behind those dramatic images was a much deeper story of oil, power, fear, and global politics. The conflict between the United States and Iraq was not a single war, but two major wars that would redefine the Middle East and reshape how the world views American military power. The story begins with Iraq under Saddam Hussein, a strongman leader who ruled with an iron fist and sought regional dominance. In 1990, when Iraq invaded neighboring Kuwait, it shocked the international community and threatened global oil supplies. The United States responded by building a massive international coalition, leading toward the 1991 Gulf War. Just over a decade later, the world would watch again as U.S. forces returned to Iraq in 2003, this time with the goal of removing Saddam Hussein from power. The reasons given were weapons of mass destruction and national security, but the outcome would be far more complicated than anyone expected. Together, these two wars show how military victories do not always bring lasting peace. They reveal how decisions made in moments of crisis can shape nations for generations. To understand today's Middle East and America's role in it, we must understand the wars between the USA and Iraq. Imagine the world holding its breath as live television broadcasts show missiles lighting up the night sky over Baghdad. For the first time in history, war was no longer something people read about days later. In newspapers, it was unfolding in real time, right in their living rooms. The conflict between the United States and Iraq became a global spectacle, but beneath the explosions and dramatic footage lay decades of tension, fear, and political ambition. This was not a sudden clash. It was the result of power struggles, regional instability, and the growing influence of the United States as the world's dominant military force. What made this conflict even more significant was that it happened not once, but twice, first in 1991 and again in 2003, each time changing the course of history. To understand these wars, we must first understand Iraq under Saddam Hussein. Saddam ruled Iraq with absolute authority, presenting himself as a strong leader who could stand up to Western powers and dominate the Middle East. Iraq had one of the largest armies in the region and vast oil reserves, making it strategically important. After a long and devastating war with Iran in the 1980s, Iraq was economically broken and deeply in debt. Saddam believed that controlling Kuwait's oil fields would solve Iraq's financial problems and strengthen his regional power. When Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait in August 1990, it sent shockwaves across the world. This act threatened global oil supplies and challenged international law, forcing the United States to step in as a global leader. The first major chapter of this conflict unfolded as the Gulf War of 1991. The United States quickly formed a massive international coalition, including Arab nations, European allies, and support from the United Nations. Operation Desert Storm began with one of the most intense air campaigns ever seen. 4 weeks, U.S.-led forces bombed Iraqi military targets, communication centers, and infrastructure. The goal was to weaken Iraq before any ground invasion. When coalition troops finally moved in, the ground war lasted only about 100 hours. Iraqi forces were overwhelmed, and Kuwait was liberated. The Gulf War was seen as a decisive military victory for the United States, showcasing advanced technology, precision weapons, and modern warfare tactics. However, Saddam Hussein remained in power, and many issues were left unresolved. Although the Gulf War ended quickly, its consequences lingered for years. Iraq was placed under strict economic sanctions, which crippled its economy and caused immense suffering among ordinary civilians. Weapons inspections were imposed to ensure Iraq no longer possessed weapons of mass destruction. These sanctions and inspections created ongoing tension between Iraq and the United States. Throughout the 1990s, airstrikes, no-fly zones, and political pressure kept Iraq isolated. Saddam's defiance of inspections and the suffering of the Iraqi population became major talking points in international politics. The situation remained unstable, setting the stage for an even more controversial conflict in the next decade. The second major chapter began in 2003, when the United States launched the Iraq War. This time, the goal was not just to contain Iraq, but to completely remove Saddam Hussein from power. The U.S. government claimed that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and had links to terrorism, posing a direct threat to global security. Despite widespread international debate and opposition, U.S. and coalition forces invaded Iraq. Baghdad fell quickly, and Saddam Hussein's government collapsed. Statues of Saddam were torn down, symbolizing the end of his rule. At first, it seemed like another swift military success. Saddam was eventually captured, tried, and executed, marking a dramatic end to his reign. However, the aftermath of the 2003 invasion proved far more complex and devastating than expected. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found, raising serious questions about the justification for the war. Iraq descended into chaos as sectarian violence, insurgency, and terrorism spread across the country. U.S. forces found themselves fighting not a traditional army, but guerrilla groups and extremist organizations. The power vacuum created by Saddam's removal led to years of instability, costing hundreds of thousands of lives and displacing millions of people. The war deeply divided global opinion and damaged trust in U.S. leadership. What was meant to bring democracy instead unleashed long-term conflict. In the final chapter of this story, the true impact of the USA-Iraq wars becomes clear. These wars reshaped Iraq's political structure, destabilized the Middle East, and influenced the rise of extremist groups. For the United States, they marked a turning point in foreign policy, raising questions about military intervention, intelligence, and global responsibility. The Gulf War showed how powerful modern militaries could be, while the Iraq War revealed the limits of that power. Together, these conflicts remind us that winning battles does not always mean winning peace. The legacy of the USA versus Iraq wars continues to shape global politics, proving that the consequences of war can last far longer than the fighting itself. The wars between the United States and Iraq may have ended on the battlefield, but their consequences are still unfolding today. What began as a response to invasion and security threats turned into conflicts that reshaped an entire region and redefined global power. Iraq paid a devastating price. Its cities, society, and generations of people were scarred by years of war and instability. For the United States, these wars forced difficult questions about intervention, intelligence, and the true cost of military dominance. The Gulf War showed the world the strength of modern warfare, while the Iraq War revealed its limits. Together, they remind us that removing a regime is far easier than rebuilding a nation. The story of USA versus Iraq is not just about missiles and tanks. It is about decisions, consequences, and lessons that still matter today. Understanding these wars helps us understand the modern Middle East and the long shadow that war can cast over history.